Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio today, we have our reporters in Chunghae-in and Arirang. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening.
Good evening to you guys. Well, today marks the 78th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan's colonial rule. Of course, we had the usual Liberation Day ceremony being held in Seoul, during which President Yoon Suk Yeol making his Liberation Day remarks here. We're going to start things off with what the president had to say. Arirang, you're going to start us off.
Sure. President Yoon Suk Yeol said today that South Korea and Japan are now partners, sharing universal values and pursuing common interests, as he marked the 78th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule. Yoon made the remark in a speech during a Liberation Day ceremony held in Seoul today, and this address was yet another testament to Yoon's commitment to improve relations with Tokyo that hit the lowest points under the previous governments due to the unresolved historical disputes. Yoon said, as partners that cooperate on security and the economy, Korea and Japan will be able to jointly contribute to peace and prosperity across the globe while collaborating and exchanging in a future-oriented manner. Regarding the relationship with the United States, Yoon emphasized that Korea-US alliance is an alliance of peace and prosperity based on universal values, and trilateral cooperation between Korea, US, Japan is more important than ever on the Korean peninsula as well as in the region. To give listeners context about what South Korean president's speech on the National Liberation Day means, South Korea won its independence after 35 years of Japanese colonial rule on August 15, 1945. The South Korean president delivers a speech every year to remember the day of national liberation and honor those who fought for the country's independence. Through this speech, we can see the administration's diplomatic principles and the message it's trying to send to the neighboring countries.
It is interesting because ever since President Yoon Suk Yeol took office just last year, we've noticed a clear change in the stance when it comes to Japan-related issues. And even during some of the other previous conservative administrations, we've seen presidents kind of avoid the issue talking about Japan during Liberation Day speeches, as, I mean, it is a very sensitive topic. It literally is, being liberated from Japan's colonial rules. But you can certainly see even last year, he made a mention about Japan. This year, he made a mention about improving relations with Japan as well. But it was where he delivered, after he delivered the National Liberation Day speech, it was reported by the top office that the president went to his father's side as Professor Yoon Gi-jung. His father passed away at the age of 92. Of course, the president will keep it a private family funeral for 3 days. They're saying that his upcoming summit over at Camp David with Presidents Joe Biden and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will be put in place, unchanged there, of course. And nevertheless, being one of the countries highlighted in President Yoon's remarks, the United States also sent out its message to celebrate the 78th anniversary of the Korean Liberation Day. We had U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressing the importance of the South Korea-U.S. alliance. Yay, let's get all that and more.
Right. So it was on the 14th local time when the U.S. Secretary of State issued a congratulatory statement on South Korea's Liberation Day, where he emphasized the steadfast alliance between South Korea and the United States, as it is also celebrating the 70th year since the establishment of the alliance. Blinken said in his statement, quote, "On behalf of the U.S. government, I extend my warm congratulations to the Republic of Korea on its Liberation Day, and I want to reaffirm the strength of our alliance in its 70th year and celebrate our strategic partnership." Now, acknowledging the shared values that form the foundation of the strong bond between the two countries, he added, quote, "The United States remains committed to achieving a truly global partnership between our countries, including by expanding people-to-people ties, investing in economic growth, and upholding international peace and stability." He ended his message by saying, "We have accomplished much together, and I look forward to many more years of the RK-US U.S. friendship. Now, Antony Blinken was not the only one to extend his heart from the United States. The mayor of New York City, he raised the Korean national flag with Korean American youth at the Charging Bull statue, which symbolizes Wall Street in New York City, the world's financial hub, and referring to the influence of Korean Americans and their standing in New York. The mayor said in his speech, New York is the soul of America. It is third time Korean national flag was raised by the Association for the Next Generation of America, which is a Korean American youth association in front of the Charging Bull.
Interesting stuff there. Well, while the New York City mayor had raised the Korean flag on the Wall Street, had cabinet members of the Japanese government visiting a very controversial Yasukuni Shrine today. This, of course, an area where they pay respects to some of the worst of Japan's past militarism. I believe also a number of Class A war criminals are also laid to rest there. Arirang, let's get the latest on this.
That's right, SJ. Japanese Economic Security Ministers Hanae Takaichi visited the Yasukuni Shrine today, marking the fourth consecutive year that a cabinet member has offered prayers at the Yasukuni Shrine on the anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. Also on the day, among high-ranking politicians, Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party policy chief Koichi Hagiuda paid his respect at Yasukuni. Takaichi, known for her hawkish views on security matters, told reporters after visiting the shrine that she offered her condolences to those who lost their lives for national interest. Meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida sent a ritual offering called masakaki to the shrine instead of making an in-person visit, with an apparent aim to avoid diplomatic tension with South Korea and China. The Yasukuni Shrine honors 14 Class A convicted war criminals among 2.5 million Japanese war dead from the Second World War, and is regarded as a symbol of past Japanese militarism. Even though 78 years has passed, the specter of Japanese war criminals still looms as they are enshrined in the Yasukuni Shrine with occasional open visits by Japanese politicians. Past visits to the shrine by prime ministers, such as the assassinated Shinzo Abe and other lawmakers, have drawn sharp criticism from South Korea and China, where memories of Japanese militarism run deep. Recent prime ministers, however, have sent offerings to the shrine for its festivals, as well as for the anniversary of the end of World War II, in order to avoid any diplomatic confrontations.
So it used to be some years ago that when former and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was alive, he would actually still go to pay respects at the Yasukuni Shrine. And of course, that led to a number of countries like South Korea and China really going against the idea of a leader of the country kind of paying respects to the war criminals. And it was only until I believe the U.S. got involved and said, listen, you can't do that as, the Prime Minister of Japan. And so ever since then, I believe what happened was as long as they're in office as the Prime Minister, they would just send offerings. And that was sort of true with Yoshihide Suga as well. Fumio Kishida, of course, sending only offerings. It is after they leave office, and that was the case with even Shinzo Abe, with Yoshihide Suga, that they ended up going to the Yasukuni Shrine because it's no longer controversial if you're not the Prime Minister of Japan anymore and you can go there. But the whole controversy over paying respects to some of these war criminals, and for our listeners out there, if you guys are interested in listening to like these documentary history podcasts and stuff like that, I think I say this every August 15th. I feel like for some reason this feels like deja vu all over again, because one of the war criminals laid to rest at the Yasukuni Shrine is a former Japanese general by the name of Hideki Tojo. Mm-hmm. And if you guys read a bit about Hideki Tojo, you'll find out what kind of a terrible person this person was, and how much of an evil general he was during the World War there. So, read up on it and kind of shows you why there's so much controversy over kind of paying respects to such war criminals. But nevertheless, the day before the Korea Liberation Day today, you had South Korea's independence fighter Choi Jae-hyung and his wife Elena Petrovna Che who have been posthumously reunited in spirit. That's 103 years after his passing. Yin, let's talk more about this.
Right. So the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs held a reburial ceremony for Mr. and Mrs. Choi on the 14th at Hyunchungwon, the Seoul National Cemetery. So the soil from Usurisk, Russia, which is believed to be the site of Choi Jae-hyung's final resting place, and the remains of his wife, Elena Choi, who had been buried in a Kyrgyz cemetery for more than 70 years, were finally buried together in their homeland. Choi Jae-hyung, who moved to Siberia with his parents at the age of 9, became a self-made businessman and used his wealth to fight for his country's independence and the well-being of hundreds of thousands of his compatriots in Siberia. Now known as the godfather of the independence movement in the Russian maritime province, Choi not only participated in anti-Japanese fights himself, but also published news articles heightening morale and patriotism in his own newspaper company and looked after some of the key independence fighters, including An Jung-gun. Choi's grave was originally formed in 1970 at the Graveyard for Patriots in Seoul National Cemetery, but it was withdrawn and had remained empty until now, after it was revealed the then claimed descendant was actually fake, who was only seeking to receive Patriot's family pension. Ever since then, the true family of the Patriot was not able to recover Choi's grave as the National Cemetery Act did not allow placing the memorial tablets for patriotic martyrs in Seoul National Cemetery whose bodies were not recovered. Now, to address this, the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs pushed for an amendment to this act, which was implemented last year and enabling the memorial plaque of the martyr with no remains or body to be interred alongside the remains of his or her spouse. Now, his family members from Russia and other countries, they came all the way to South Korea for the burial ceremony, and the Korean public also paid tribute, thanking the couple for their sacrifice and dedication for Korea's independence.
Now, of course, also in commemoration of the 78th anniversary of Korea's Liberation Day, the South Korean government decided to award decorations to 100 late independence fighters, this in honor of their sacrifices. Let's get more on this, Haran.
Sure. The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs announced that they would confer state medals and awards on 100 late independence fighters to honor their sacrifices in the resistance movement against Japanese colonial rule over the Korean peninsula. Those to be awarded include Frank Williams, an American missionary who supported Korean Liberation Army soldiers deployed in joint operations with British troops in India in 1943. Williams, who was fluent in Korean, taught English to the Koreans taking part in psychological warfare against Japanese forces in India. He had arrived in Korea in 1908 and established a school in Gongju, Chungcheongnam-do Province, attended by numerous independence fighters, including famous activist Yu Kwan-sun. Williams will be awarded with the National Foundation Medal for his efforts to support the independence movement. Other activists to be honored include Ham Bong-ryun, who was arrested by Japanese military police for leading an independence rally in Tongyeong, Gyeongsangnam-do Province. Born in 1902, Ham was a female entertainer, or giseng in Korean, when she participated in the independence movement with 6 of her colleagues. Minister Bang Min-sik of Patriots and Veterans Affairs said the government would do its best to find more independence activists going forward and promote the patriots' noble lives and spirits so that they are carried on to our future generations.
Yeah, for our listeners out there, just to kind of explain why it's so difficult to kind of find the identities of these independence fighters is because oftentimes these freedom fighters and the independence fighters, they were kind of doing everything in anonymity. And so A lot of their identity were hidden. There was not a lot of information on them and not a lot of record were on them. We sort of know like the big names that were involved with this, but there's also a large number of other independent fighters whose names don't get the recognition I think that they deserve. And I think this is great that the government is pushing forward to recognize more of these heroes who took part in, of course, the continuous fight for Korea's liberation. Let's move on here, switch gears to some domestic affairs. While even an audit by the Board of Audit and Inspection is expected to determine who is responsible for the widely controversial Saemangeum World Scout Jamboree debacle, the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, which was one of the ministries responsible for the Jamboree, still remaining silent. Yang, let's get more on this.
Sure, SJ. So following the end of the World Scout Jamboree, now all eyes are on who is the one to blame for this tumultuous journey. So the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family is refraining from making any official response related to the Jamboree, focusing on preparations for an audit by the Board of Audit and Inspection beginning as early as this week. It is also gearing up for the upcoming inquiry session at the National Assembly's Women and Family Affairs Committee, which is scheduled for the 25th. So at the ministry's regular briefings on the 14th, reporters asked questions about the Jamboree, but the ministry avoided providing direct answers to them. At the briefing, the ministry's spokesperson, Jo Min-kyung, said, quote, Minister Kim Hyun-suk is now feeling a grave sense of responsibility as the chairperson of the organizing committee, and the ministry cannot agree with the claim that it lacks a sense of responsibility for the Jamboree events. Now, after the event, reporters requested a meeting with the minister, but the ministry refused, citing a tight schedule while having to respond to parliamentary inquiries. Apparently, as of today, the ministry has reportedly received more than 200 requests from lawmakers' offices. Now, this is actually contrary to the Jeollabuk-do province, which has begun to take an aggressive stance against the controversy. Governor Kim Kwan-young held a press conference yesterday where he stated he feels a sense of responsibility as a governor, but at the same time, he also hinted at a tougher response, saying, quote, any attempt to disdain or forcibly undo the efforts put into the Saemangeum project itself, which is a decades-long national project, will not be tolerated. Now, in addition to the upcoming national audit, the governor said he would conduct the province's own audit to uncover cases of inappropriate use of tax money and misappropriation.
Yeah, there's a lot of fishiness going on right now. They're doing preliminary audits on where the money was being spent, and they got a look into one particular construction company that did much of the construction of the facilities there, and when they kind of did a Google map on where this place was located, it was like a very shady looking small little building area that no one's ever heard of. And so where was all of this money being funneling through? There's going to be a lot of questions at hand right now. And of course, as we mentioned, the two rival parties are going back and forth here. Whose fault is it exactly? The PPP is saying because this was, the host city was announced back in 2017 during the Moon administration, that all those years that they had, of course, prepared, it is their fault, while the Democratic Party is basically saying, well, in the past year, the vast majority of the fund was used during the Yoon administration. So a lot of political wrangling going on. So we knew that this was going to happen as soon as the Jamboree was done and over with, and I'm sure we'll get some answers on that. As some areas are still reeling from the devastation left by Typhoon Khanun just last week, we had South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol designated two areas that were hit hardest by the natural disaster in order to help their recovery. Tell us where the two areas are at on.
Sure. According to the presidential office, President Yoon Suk Yeol on Monday designated two areas hit hard by last week's Typhoon Khanun as special disaster zones. They are the town of Gunwi in Daegu and a part of Goseong in Gangwon Province. The typhoon, which plowed through South Korea from south to north for 16 hours last week, caused flooding, facility destruction, landslides, and even school closures. The designation makes the areas eligible for the government's financial support in recovery work, relief funds for victims, and other benefits. Last month, the government already designated 13 areas hit hard by deadly downpours as special disaster zones. In addition, in April, President Yoon declared 15 towns, including Goseong and Cheongsong in Gyeongsang-Bukdo Province, Yeongdong in Chungcheong-Bukdo Province, and Naju in Jeollanam-do Province as special disaster areas due to poor harvest caused by frost, abnormally low temperatures, and other cold-related issues. It is quite unprecedented that special disaster zones were designated for agricultural damage. A spokesperson for the presidential office said, up until now, the special disaster areas were designated only for areas with infrastructure damage by natural disasters, but the Yoon administration had decided to consider agricultural damage as well when deciding special disaster areas to alleviate the difficulties faced by farmers.
You know, I know it's kind of a little bit off topic here, but we knew that Typhoon Khanun had moved northwards and entered North Korea and so forth. And we've always talked about how during the monsoon season and during the typhoon season that North Korea is especially impacted by this because North Korea just doesn't have the kind of sewer system or the facilities that South Korea has. And so it's even more devastating for them. But those news that came out recently with Kim Jong-un sort of inspecting the areas, and apparently he was furious. Kim Jong-un was furious that the officials did nothing to kind of alleviate the damages or mitigate the damages caused by Typhoon Khanun. But really, can you blame the officials there when, once again, a lot of the money, there is no money to put into the facilities in North Korea. And so, I mean, Kim Jong-un is pretty much siphoning all the money to himself. And so it's always kind of concerning with the agricultural stuff, especially in North Korea, where again, most of their, I guess their output is agriculture. So a little bit off topic, but I wanted to mention that. Let's kind of turn our focus into something that we didn't talk about for some quite time now. It is the ongoing Ukraine war. Interestingly, and a bit concerning, Britain's defense ministry said in a statement that the UK scrambled fighter jets to respond to Russian Marine Patrol aircraft. This was flying north of Scotland. Yane, let's get the latest on this.
Sure. So the British Defense Ministry said Typhoon fighter jets flew on alert on the early morning of the 14th as two Russian bombers passed north of the Shetland Islands in Scotland, part of the NATO's northern air policing area. Now, if you look it up on the map, it's sitting somewhere between Scotland and Norway, which is the northern part of the North Sea. So fueling tanker planes also joined and remained airborne in case they were needed, as the Royal Air Force Typhoon jets flew for an aerial surveillance of the two Russian long-range maritime patrol bombers. After this encounter with the Russian jets, the Typhoons were reported to have safely returned to their base. The British Minister of State for the Armed Forces, James Heaby, said in his statement that the country stands ready to counter any potential threat to British territory, and the Royal Air Force is always prepared to take action at a moment's notice to keep the country safe. He added the British Typhoon jets have routinely responded to such situations and have done so most recently for more than 50 times actually when leading the NATO's aerial reconnaissance mission in Estonia.
And speaking of Russia and the Ukraine war, the U.S. Department of Defense issued a statement yesterday that it would provide an additional package of military equipment to Ukraine, this worth $200 million here. And of course, the amount of kind of assistance that we've seen from the U.S. has been astronomical. It is continuing on. Aran, let's get the latest on this.
Sure. The U.S. Defense Department announced an additional security assistance package worth up to $200 million to help Ukraine counter Russia's ongoing aggression. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement that the package includes air defense munitions, artillery rounds, anti-armor capabilities, and additional mine-clearing equipment. The latest round of assistance marks the 44th tranche of equipment drawdown from DoD inventories for Ukraine since August 2021. According to the statement by the Defense Department, the package underscores the United States' continued commitment to providing Ukraine with the capabilities it needs to defend its territory. The Biden administration has committed more than $43 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And he also has vowed to aid Ukraine as long as it takes. But his administration's relentless spending on Ukraine has faced opposition in Congress, especially from far-right Republicans who argued against assisting Ukraine indefinitely. Meanwhile, in a recent poll by CNN, majority of Americans oppose Congress authorizing additional funding to support Ukraine. 55% of the respondents say the U.S. Congress should not authorize additional funding to Ukraine, while 45% say Congress should authorize such funding. And 51% say that the U.S. has already done enough to help Ukraine, while 48% say it should do more.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that the number of people who are for continual assistance of Ukraine is dwindling, because if you guys remember at the very start, by the way, the only person I see right now, one of our listeners, by the way, Sarah Louise Walsh, still has her support Ukraine flag on her ID picture there. I know a number of our listeners had that, and over time, obviously, it disappeared and so forth. But I could understand why the opposition is coming from, because they're also saying, that's a whole lot of money you're talking about, 43 billion US dollars just being put into Ukraine. And so they're saying, the Biden administration continues to just printing money, and this is leading to further inflations and so forth. But on the flip side, you have to also take into consideration, is the Biden administration or Washington in general doing this for free? Well, one of the things that a lot of the governments, all the countries who are assisting Ukraine is looking forward to in the next maybe few years, hopefully earlier the better, is the reconstruction projects. And so by helping Ukraine, one of the things that are going to come back is the reconstruction projects that can be promised to a number of companies from a number of countries that helped assist Ukraine. And that, of course, being one of the countries being South Korea, because I believe there's already a memorandum of understanding between a particular South Korean company and reconnecting the telephone lines, for instance, and certainly going to help out the economy there. So interesting stuff that there is more and more people opposing to this. But some experts are also saying that the Ukraine war, in fact, is likely to evolve in a way that resembles that of sort of like the Korean War, where countries fought back with a series of attacks, unable to defeat the aggressor, and basically resulting in this protracted stalemate, right? There was a lot of ups and downs. If you see like the graphics of how the Korean War kind of panned out, it was like North Korea pushing back South Korea all the way down to Busan. Busan was the only city left over, and then the Incheon landing happens, and then it goes all the way towards China, near the Chinese border, and then back to the 38th parallel was what it is. Yin, interesting stuff coming out here. Tell us more about this.
Yes, SJ. So it was in a Wall Street Journal's report that this speculation was raised, citing multiple analyses of Western warfare experts. Now, expecting Ukraine's current offensive to retake Russian-held territory to take at least several months, military strategists across the West have apparently begun thinking of an offensive next spring. So while optimists hope for the Ukrainians to push back the Russians when they began their counteroffensive this spring, the Ukraine's attacks with Western-supplied tanks and armored vehicles has now stalled. Dmitry Gorenberg is a Russian expert at the Center for Naval Analyses, which is a think tank linked to Pentagon. He said in his talk with the WSJ that, quote, this war can be seen as something that's similar to the Korean War in terms of rapid moves on the front lines in the early months, followed by relative stagnation thereafter, taking years for both sides to realize it. He added that the Korean War, which began in June of 1950 and ended with the signing of an armistice in July 1953, has since gone through continued confrontation on both sides of the armistice line without technically ending the war. Others recognize, however, the potential of the Ukrainian military, which has received advanced military training from Western countries, citing the fact that only some of Ukraine's best trained troops took part in the last offensive. A high-level official at NATO claimed that over time, more Ukrainian troops and commanders will go through advanced Western training.
I would say the biggest difference, though, between the Korean War and the war in Ukraine right now is the fact that the main reason for why the Korean War ended up in a stalemate is because China got involved with this, right? And so there was a number of reasons. I mean, China as a communist state and North Korea supporting the communist party, communist ideas. The U.S. troops also getting dangerously close to the Chinese border. I think that was one of the main reasons for why the Chinese troops got involved. They also wanted to help out the communist North Korea as well. But right now, we're in a case where Russia is calling for help from China, but China is knowingly smart enough, saying if we get involved with this war, it's going to further isolate us from the international community. Where we just can't. I mean. Yes, the one way that they support them is through like the UN Security Council resolution, the sanctioned, vetoes that they use with their veto power and stuff like that. But there hasn't been a direct help from China, which is the other thing. And the other difference is, of course, well, Russia has nuclear weapons. That certainly could change the wave of this war right now. And so I think it's a little bit more concerning on that front. But it certainly does seem like a stalemate. And for Ukraine, of course, they're trying to take back the territory that they've lost to Ukraine. So we'll see what happens. This war is certainly taking a longer time that a lot of people had initially anticipated. Speaking of Russia, we are seeing the Russian ruble continuing to be weak against the U.S. dollar. Hit its lowest level since early in the war with Ukraine. And it appears that the Russian central bank plans to step in to stabilize the currency there. Tell us about the reason behind the recent plunge, Arirang.
Sure. The Russian ruble has fallen to its lowest level in 16 months, falling past 100 per US dollar. So it means the ruble is now worth less than 1 cent. The decline comes as pressure grows on the Russian economy as imports rise faster than exports, and military spending grows for the Ukraine war. Also, Western nations imposed crippling sanctions on the country in response to its invasion of Ukraine. The ruble plummeted when the war first broke out, but it was quickly bolstered by capital controls and oil and gas exports. Since then, the ruble's value has been fluctuating, and it has now lost more than 1/3 of its value since the beginning of this year. Earlier on Monday, the ruble was 101.04 per US dollar. As everybody knows, the more rubles per dollar means the currency is weakening as we need more rubles to buy 1 US dollar. So in order to support the flagging ruble, Russia's central bank said a rate hike is possible anytime soon, while maintaining its stance that it sees weak ruble poses no threat to the country's financial stability. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the bank made a rate hike from 9.5% to 20%, but began cutting it shortly afterwards. Currently, the key interest rate is 8.5%, and Russia's central bank will hold an emergency meeting on Tuesday local time to discuss a possible rate rise.
I just got some latest updates here. The Russian central bank had just about less than an hour ago decided that they're going to raise the interest rate to 12% at an emergency meeting. And so initially they were going to be, initially it was 8.5%. They've raised it to 12%. That's a massive hike of the key interest rate here. This just came in just an hour ago, right afterwards. But I was just looking at the currency exchange. It is exactly 1 cent. 1 US cent to 1 Russian ruble, which means that $1 actually it might be a little bit less than a cent here, because 1 Russian US dollar equals 97.95 Russian rubles at this time. And so you were talking about, Arirang, there was at the start of, this was back in March 2022 when it hit the lowest level since the start of the Ukraine war. And it was at the time far less. It was 0.0075 cents per ruble. And it went up because at the time what Vladimir Putin said was, listen, you guys just need our energy. We have whole lot of energy and the oil and stuff like that. And you could only purchase it using Russian ruble, I believe was what he said. And so like that really jacked up the currency for the rubles to the point where I believe it's still far from its all-time high back in 2008, June of 2008, where it used to be 4 cents to the Russian ruble. But yeah, they have one thing that everyone wants, and it's energy, and they're going to use that to try to raise up the currency rate. But it is interesting that the Russian central bank did raise their rates to 12% to support the battle ruble there. Nevertheless, something to continue to keep a close tab on. But for now, guys, thank you very much for joining us on this Liberation Day. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.